On the screen here are several photos of me as a child, ranging from about 18 months to 5 years old, I think. The first shows me quite surprised to have my photo taken and generally a little unsure about what's going on. Then there's me proudly wearing my favourite t-shirt and very happy to have my photo taken. A little bit older and I'm not enjoying it at all, and I'm probably also blocking it. And finally sitting neatly for what I think is my first school photo, slightly timid and aware that this is a time to behave. Each of us have this same picture book of our past, and as boring, frustrating, or enjoyable as each photo may have been to take at the time, they track the passing of our childhood and illustrate our maturing personalities. Now, the joys of social media mean that from day naught, the lives of children are documented, shared, and commented upon. A virtual photo album that captures the fleeting moments of youth. Throughout history, people have made this same attempt, to sit their children down and distract them for long enough to be sketched, painted, or photographed. This is a portrait by the 18th century British artist Thomas Gainsborough of his daughters Mary and Margaret, not sitting, but running through a wooded landscape chasing a butterfly. This has long been considered Gainsborough's meditation on the transience of childhood. Delicate and restless like a butterfly, blink for too long and it's gone. We also see the sisterly relationship between the two girls. The younger Mary leaps forward boldly, arm outstretched, with an expression of fixed fascination, unconscious of the large thistle below the butterfly and the stones strewn across her path. Margaret, only about 18 months older, approaches the moment with greater caution, gently holding back her sister's hand and lifting her apron out of the way of the brambles and mud. The few months between these two girls is enough for Margaret to have wised up to the potential for disaster that stems from careless action. The dark undergrowth adds to this sense of hidden danger as the two children navigate their way through both the landscape and childhood itself. Unlike the more formal portraits of children that Gainsborough undertook for his patrons, here he's experimenting with new ways of portraying the young and capturing the very essence of childhood. Mary and Margaret are curious, spirited, and free to play outdoors. This speaks to a social shift in the understanding of childhood that took hold in the mid-18th century in Britain. From this period onwards, there was a fundamental change in attitude towards children. A few years after Gainsborough painted this work, the Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau published a novel called Émile, in which he argued that children are naturally good and should be allowed to explore and learn about the world on their own. Rousseau's philosophy had a profound impact on 18th century thought, which was reflected in portraiture at the time. Whereas in the 17th century, depictions of children were constrained by the desire to uphold family dynasty and hierarchy. The 18th century, though, saw a flowering and a more sentimental portrait type in which the child held the central position. Parents celebrated their children by commissioning these works, which captured the transience of childhood before it slipped away. Gainsborough was by no means the only artist to use the butterfly in his work. A few years before this, William Hogarth had also painted a picture in which a brother and sister are equally hypnotised by a butterfly resting on the petals of a sunflower. This isn't the best reproduction, it's a bit cropped on the left-hand side, but get the general idea. Here the children, older than Mary and Margaret Gainsborough by several years, are dressed in more adult clothing, gazing upon the symbol of their passing from childhood to adulthood. It's been suggested that this use of butterfly in portraits of this type stems from a children's rhyme called Of the Boy and the Butterfly. The rhyme begins with a description of a boy chasing a butterfly. The author then writes, "The butterfly doth represent to me the world's best thing, at best but fading be." In other words, wonderful as childhood is, it fades and passes like all good things. In another portrait by Hogarth of the Graham children, painted 5 years earlier, the artist conveys this sense of impermanence through a different set of symbols. with the dangers of childhood subtly embedded within the image. As the boy on the right turns his music box, he looks up to the caged bird, delighted to see it chirp and flap its wings at the sound he's making. But unbeknownst to the boy, a cat hovers behind his head with eyes wide open, ready to pounce on the cage. This image of threat can be read as a commentary on the potential dangers to all children as they make their way from their early years into adulthood. This is even more pronounced on the other side of the canvas, because sitting on the table above the head of the little boy is a clock ticking away, charting the passing of time. And a figure holding a scythe is placed on top of that. And what makes these symbols so emphatic is that the little boy on the left had died before the completion of this painting. This is both a warning and an announcement. The fragility of childhood gave the butterfly motif particular resonance during this period because of its brief existence. During the 18th century, infant mortality rates were high, and parents constantly feared their precious loved ones would be snatched away by some sort of illness. When tragedy struck, portraits gave parents a visual and material reminder of their children. A couple of rooms away, through there and round to the right, you'll see this portrait of Penelope Boothby, painted by Sir Joshua Reynolds. This image came to epitomise popular 18th century ideas about the innocence of children and was widely copied after it was first exhibited in 1871, making it one of Reynolds' most famous portraits of a child. The dark landscape that surrounds the child and the unusual use of blue for the ribbons, as opposed to the more standard pink, emphasises the white of Penelope's dress and mobcap, and in turn her innocence. This is particularly relevant as Penelope's father, Sir Brooke Boothby, was a follower of Rousseau and was a key figure in the dissemination of his works in England. It's worth noting, though, that Reynolds used bitumen in his paint to create these dark tones, and this is a non-drying substance that eventually darkens and causes cracks in the paints, and you'll be able to see this if you look closely at it in the other room. But in 1791, Penelope's parents were faced with the most heartbreaking event of their lives when their nearly 6-year-old daughter passed away. Penelope's parents were devastated by the event and separated shortly afterwards. As the inscription on Penelope's tomb reads, the unfortunate parents ventured their all on this frail bark, and the wreck was total. Her father, Sir Brooke Boothby, was utterly broken, and not long after the tragic event, he published an entire volume of poetry lamenting the death of his beloved child. In the introduction, he writes, "The following little works were written to relieve a mind overburthened with grief, and are here collected as a frail monument, designed to withhold for a moment from the grasp of oblivion one loved not wisely but too well. They have small pretensions to poetical merit, but they are the expressions of real feelings." In this volume, we see again the image of the butterfly, in this instance emerging out of a chrysalis, a more hopeful image that represents a soul freed from earthly constraints, a symbol of her transition from earthly to heavenly existence. Following Penelope's death, her parents commissioned Henry Fuseli to paint this departure and to portray her ascent to heaven. I've also included a print here because, again, you see at the bottom the image of a butterfly next to an overturned urn, which is a little bit clearer here than in this reproduction. In some instances, parents commissioned portraits as a way of clinging on to their departed child, a desperate attempt to grab hold of that butterfly that had flown away. In this portrait by George Romney of Anne Wilson and her daughter Sybil, it's not immediately clear that Sybil was in fact dead at the time of its creation. On closer inspection, though, various signs within the work show that this is not just an image that displays maternal love, but it's one that commemorates the death of a dearly beloved child. The mother's head is cast downwards, in the position of the female figure of mourning that permeated funerary imagery at the time. Her arms softly embrace the child's delicate form, but the two figures don't actively interact. They belong to two separate realms. Sybil looks out to the viewer with a calm and peaceful expression, content in her departure from this world. The two interconnected figures are separated by death, but connected by love. But there were, of course, many children who did make it through the perils of their early years and grew up happy and healthy. I'm going to discuss a portrait rather unlike some of the ones I've already shown, because it's a fascinating work that demonstrates an artist's attempt to very literally accommodate the transience of childhood and the passing of time, which we can see thanks to the help of modern science. In this family portrait by Johan Zoffany, the Drummond family gather around their grandfather, founder of Drummond Bank. 3 generations are represented in this work, which in itself alludes to time passing: the grandfather, mother, father, and 3 children. But the construction of this painting is very complicated. Zoffany originally painted this portrait on another canvas, and for some reason he decided to start again and cut out several figures before stitching them into a new canvas like pieces of a puzzle. There isn't time to go into too much detail about this, but there's a video on YouTube by Jessica David at Yale who explains this very clearly. He then repainted all of the figures in order to create the final composition we see now. This whole process must have taken several years, because as you can see from this X-ray, the young boy on the right has grown by several inches between the original and final painting. Here, the passing of youth is literally documented on the surface of the canvas. There's no butterfly in this work, but the emblematic meaning behind this motif is deeply embedded in its fabric. As I hope I've explained, over the course of the 18th century in Britain, artists and their patrons were preoccupied with capturing this transitory stage of early life. As ideas about the nature of childhood started to shift, and greater emphasis was placed on play outdoors, self-discovery, and innate innocence, so too did portraits of children. In a time of high infant mortality rates, parents felt an even greater desire to have an image of their child, in hope that it would be a reminder of those early years, but with the possibility that it may be the only portrait ever made. Parents wanted to capture those fleeting early moments that disappear all too quickly, much as we do every time we whip out our iPhones to snap that touching or hilarious moment of a child dear to us. So next time you flick through the photo album or record those key or sometimes trivial moments in the life of a child you know, I hope you'll reflect on the part you're playing in a tradition that goes back many hundreds of years. Thank you.